It's a kind of a strange way how I got involved with Maniac. I'd been invited to a convention called Fangoria in New York City, and that was great. I went along, and who was there but Bill Lustig, and I just finished doing a film in France, at the Cannes Film Festival with Joe Spinell. So I attended the festival in New York, Fangoria, and they were there, and they were so excited. They were going to start this film called Maniac. Bill was going to direct it, Joe was going to star in it and co-produce it. So they were really excited, but they were also disappointed because their leading actress couldn't, she was still filming. It was Daria Nicolodi. Yes. She was still filming, so she couldn't actually make the film. So they were desperate. They had to start on the Monday, and this was on the Friday night. This was on the Friday of the convention. So they said, Bill said, well, what do you think? Would you like to be involved in the film, in the project? I said, well, I've got to go back to London. You know, I've got something to do, and I'm busy. So to cut a long story short, both Bill and Joe took me to see Halloween on the Saturday night, and they said, this is the type of film we are wanting to do. And I'd never seen anything quite like Halloween at the time. It was in, gosh, it was 79 I suppose, 80, 79 I think. Saw the film, I thought it was amazing. I was very frightened, but saw it, and I said, let me read the script. Let me read your script, and I shall tell you. I'll give you an answer on Sunday morning. So by Sunday night, I'd agreed to do the film. I kind of signed up to do it, and on Monday morning, Joe and I were shooting in the casino, the Clams Casino, not casino, out in New Jersey. We were filming. We began our first day shooting. Did we kind of stick to the script? Well, pretty much we stuck to the script because it was a good script. It was a very solid script. But sometimes Joe would come in the morning, and we'd sit, you know, in the makeup, and we'd kind of discuss it with Bill, and he'd say no. He said, I don't think Frank would do it this way. So he said, maybe let's try it another way. And then they'd discuss it. He and Bill would discuss it, and they said, no, yeah, you're right, Frank could do it this way. So we threaded around the story. You know, it was kind of, the story was there, but we kind of weave in and out. And I'd go with it because I'd followed Joe's lead. Bill was there, Joe was definitely there, and I was down there, but I would kind of follow their lead, really, so I'd kind of go with it. Which is good, you know, for an actor. It's nice to be able to improvise a bit. I think maybe with a lot of filmmakers, a lot is implied in a script, and again, a lot is left to the actor's imagination, and obviously director and special effect man, who we had, the wonderful Tom Savini. So I think a lot of the effects scenes were just in the script. It just said. It was very kind of ambiguous. So when it came to the actual shooting, I was kind of quite shocked as to the content. It was perhaps more graphic than I'd actually kind of anticipated, but it was extraordinary. I mean, the effects were astounding for the time. I thought they were amazing, so good. I had great fun during the shooting. I loved it. It was my second time working with an American crew. I loved it. I relished to work. I'd actually never worked on a feature film in the States before, so it was a kind of a good chance for me to work with an American crew and to work with Bill, who I thought seemed a fantastic director, and Joe, who I loved anyway. He was quite unique as an actor, quite both dark and light, but very, very clever, a very clever actor, I thought. And a wonderful person, liked him. Extraordinary person. I've never met anybody like him, I must say. Oh, the relationship between Joe and Bill was fantastic. It was solid, you know, very solid, very much a partnership. Joe was very strong as an actor. He kind of knew, he liked to experiment. So a lot of it, even though it was scripted, a lot of it was kind of quite ad-libbed. There's a scene that we did together. It was one of the first scenes that we did, whereby I was in the photographing the girls in the studio, in the loft, and then he comes along to me and he's all dressed up in his suit, his Sunday best. And we hadn't really rehearsed it too much. I'd had a morning with the photographer to learn how to use a camera, and that was interesting, set the lights and stuff. And not being a photographer myself, I found that a challenge. But then the scene, Joe comes in, and Bill had said, well, Joe's just going to come in and just say hi, and can I watch you doing something? Well, instead, Joe burst in, and the camera was turning, and then he threw this teddy bear at me from out of nowhere, which was wonderful. It was such a kind of surprise. So it was, and the camera kind of captured the surprise of me and the joy of him having given me the teddy bear, which was totally unrehearsed. So you kind of never quite knew what to expect with Joe, but that made it interesting. It made it real, you know. And Bill loved that. You know, Bill kind of supported him in that. Joe was a unique man. He could be very dark. He'd have his dark moments. We all do. We all have dark moments. We all have, you know, he could be low. He could be extraordinarily high, you know, with energy and enthusiasm. But he'd get his low points. In you know, I think he'd had it tough as a child. Loved his mum. His mum, who was in the film, loved his mum. And his family, very family orientated. But he'd kind of worked in prisons. He'd taken a lot of his acting into prisons. You know, he knew a lot. He knew a lot of the dark side of life. I had a feeling. I didn't kind of delve too much into that, but he lived hard and he played hard. It was clever because he was such a kind of demonic character, but one actually felt great sympathy for him. And I had to think, when I did my character, I had to kind of get some correlation between the two of us, because you weren't quite certain of what was implied, really. Were they going to be lovers? No. Was it more a mother figure? Kind of. More like a sister. Somebody I think he could kind of depend on, you know. And also the woman, Anna D'Antoni's sexuality was slightly, you weren't quite sure whether she liked girls, whether she liked boys. So you had to kind of, you know, work it that way, really. So the sad thing for both Joe and I on the making of Maniac is that quite a lot of the footage, which made sense with made sense of my character with him, with Joe's character, was cut. It wasn't cut, it was lost. We did quite a few scenes, extra scenes, that aren't actually in the film. We're talking about music. We're kind of getting to know each other in the film as characters. You know, I'm looking around he's looking around my apartment, he's shown up, he's smart, we're talking, we have coffee. All those scenes, for some reason, and Bill was so upset, Joe was so upset, we were so upset because it made sense of Anna D'Antoni's character with Frank. It kind of tied up the characters, but they were lost. So, and it kind of lost on the cutting room floor, which was so sad because they were good. And we were talking about Frank Sinatra. That was very much a kind of ad-libbed sequence, and it was quite good, I think. It felt good for both of us, but it sadly was not in the film. Made more sense of her character, because otherwise she's just there and you're not quite sure, and he's watching her photographing the girls, sees her in the park, and they have dinner, but you're not quite sure why. Whereas this, they're actually kind of getting to know each other, and it was lost. Sad. I think it had to be filmed in New York, because it was actually based on a real Son of Sam. They'd actually based it on a real story, which I believe was in or around the New York area. So I think it had to be, the atmosphere definitely was New York. at the time, which has kind of been cleaned up a bit now since. So all the kind of seedy bits down in the subway and the, you know, it all added to the darkness of the film, and it was shot in a very interesting way too. It was, I mean, they used lights. They had obviously had lights, but it was just a different way of filmmaking. It was very different. I'd been working a lot in Hammer in England, and you had the big brute lights. You had the very what's the word, proper way of doing things in England, and this was kind of left field for me, which was great. You know, as an actor, you went in, and it was slightly scary because you didn't know what to expect. It was, but I liked it. You know, as I say, I like a bit of a challenge, and it was, you know, it was a challenge, but it was good, and definitely had to be filmed in New York. Hotels and you know, everything was kind of right for that. And it's Joe's home, so he loved, you know, he loved New York. He absolutely loved the city, proud of the city, proud of the places. He used to take me, he said, and this is where we're going to film, you know, the prostitute in this hotel. And I looked at this seedy thing, I thought, okay, you know, it was a real hotel used by prostitutes. It was the real thing. It was the real subway. It was the real Central Park. So everything he did was kind of as real as it could be. And the cemetery was real. It wasn't a set. We went to the cemetery in New Jersey, so I liked that. You know, I thought that was good. His room was in a building, but that was a set within. That was the one thing, because you couldn't create something like his room because it was quite extraordinary. So that was slightly eerie because he had all the mannequins, and that was a bit bizarre. Watching that. Slightly scary in the underground, in the tube, in the subway, because it was at night and nobody was around. And New York, I suppose, those years ago, was a bit more scary than it is now. Slightly scary in the cemetery. That was slightly scary, and the poor lady had to be buried in the grave, and that wasn't nice because she had. I'm glad it wasn't me. Meant to be his mother. She had maggots and real put on her face, and that wasn't so nice, but she was very brave. So that was, yeah, it was interesting to be around. Joe could, I mean, he didn't live the part all the time. He would come he'd have his coffee, then he'd go in, and then he could just do it. You know, he could just do it. You'd see him think for a minute or two, and then he'd be there. Then he'd be dark, and he'd be the character. Whatever it was that triggered in his mind, he could get there, which is interesting, I think, to watch. Well, I went back home, went back to England, and I think I was ready to do another film in England. I then, later in the year, they had the opening, the premiere of the film to be in New York, which was the same time as the hostages were coming home from, what was the hostage thing? They were coming home to America, and our premiere, our night, we were having it in the same big nightclub as all the American hostages, which was an extraordinary thing because they'd been held for, it was the big
American embassy in the
yes, I think it was that. They'd been held for a long time, so the feeling was electric. You know, was the opening of the film, and then we were going to have this extraordinary party in this place, and Joe had invited all his pals. Robert Duvall was there, and I mean, it was a real eye opener for me, and especially seeing the film, because obviously I hadn't seen the film because we'd shot it for real sound. Everything had been shot real, so I didn't do any dubbing. So I came over, flew over for it, very excited, stayed in a nice hotel. And then I saw the film, and as I said before, the script was outlined very, very well, but the special effects, I wasn't prepared for the kind of